It wasn't love. It was your wound screaming his name. How many times have you called it love when it was really your ache, dressed up as devotion? He didn't choose you. He awakened something forgotten, something unfinished. You weren't falling for him. You were falling back, into the arms of a memory, into the echo of a voice that once said, "You're too much," or worse, said nothing at all. This is not a story about a man. This is a story about the part of you that still believes if you just love hard enough, someone will finally stay. But here's the truth, it wasn't love. It was your wound, screaming, whispering, seducing, hoping this time someone would hear. Carl Jung taught us, until we meet the parts of ourselves we've buried, we'll keep chasing ghosts, calling it fate, and bleeding in the name of something we never truly received. And if this already touched something in you, something tender, trembling, and tired, then this space was made for you. Subscribe. Not for me, for the version of you that's finally ready to stop confusing pain with passion. You're not broken, you're remembering. And here, you don't have to do it alone. You met him and something in your body exhaled, not because it was love, but because it was familiar. He looked at you, and a script that had been buried deep inside you for years, maybe since childhood, quietly began to run. Not words, not logic, not romance. It was something far more ancient, a nervous system memory, a psychic tremor, an invisible recognition that said, "I know this." That's the trick of the unconscious. When a wound is unresolved, it doesn't remain passive. It becomes a magnet. You don't just attract people randomly, you recreate patterns. And not because you're weak or naive, but because you're wired to resolve what was never completed, to return unconsciously to the scene of the first emotional crime, and this time, try to survive it. So no, it wasn't fate. It was a complex. Carl Jung described this phenomenon with piercing clarity. When we are possessed by a complex, we do not have it. It has us. And in the presence of someone who mirrors the emotional environment of your first wound, the complex activates like a ghost re-inhabiting the body. He didn't need to say much. Just his presence was enough to trigger a cascade of chemicals: longing, adrenaline, hope, fear, idealization. These are not the signatures of love. They are the biochemical remnants of trauma, clothed in the aesthetics of romance. And because it feels intense, we confuse it for something sacred. But look closer. What exactly did he see in you? And more importantly, what did you project onto him? The truth is, you didn't love him. You loved what you hoped he would become. You loved what he represented. An escape from the unbearable feeling of not being chosen. You loved the fantasy that this time, if you gave enough, proved enough, held enough, he wouldn't leave. This man, this familiar stranger, and was not new. He was a symbol of the father who didn't come when you cried, of the mother who loved you conditionally, of the silence that wrapped around your needs like a cold fog and whispered, "Be smaller, be quieter, be less." So when he mirrored that energy, aloof, unpredictable, emotionally absent, your unconscious said, "This is it. This is my chance to rewrite the ending, to finally be chosen by the one who reminds me most of the one who didn't." And that is the genesis of the trauma bond. It doesn't begin with abuse. It begins with the unmet need, the hope, the idealization. The idea that this person, this stranger who feels like home, might fill the cavern that's been echoing inside you since you were a child. But a wound cannot be healed by the same shape that caused it. You may have told yourself it was chemistry. You might have called it soulmate energy. You may have sworn that you'd never felt anything so intense, but intensity is not intimacy, and chemistry is often just trauma dressed in perfume. He didn't betray you. Not really. You betrayed yourself. The moment you ignored the small signals, the gut whispers, the quiet inner voice that said, "Something here is repeating." But that's not your fault. That's what happens when the wound is still raw, when the child inside you is still waiting, still hoping that someone, anyone, will prove that you're worthy of consistent love. You didn't choose him with your conscious mind. You chose him with your scar tissue. And scar tissue doesn't seek safety, and it seeks the familiar. And that's why you stayed longer than you should have. Why you gave too much. Why you confused his silence for mystery, his coldness for strength, his distance for depth. You were trying to make your wound lovable. But the wound doesn't want love. It wants resolution. And resolution never comes by reliving the pain. It comes by witnessing it, consciously. So let's be honest right here, with open palms and unflinching eyes. He wasn't the one. He was the pattern. He didn't see you. He saw your performance, and you didn't fall in love with him. You fell into a trance, a reenactment of an ancient ache, believing that this time if you just endured enough, bent enough, bled enough, it would finally end differently. But pain cannot be cured by its mirror. He was a stranger. Yes, but not to your body, not to your nervous system, not to the wound still echoing the first heartbreak that had no name. And if your heart is aching right now as you hear this, not with regret, but with recognition, then something is already shifting. Because now you see it. It wasn't love. It was the echo. It was the wound. And you are finally waking up from the spell. There are wounds so old, so silent, they stop being memories and start becoming identities. And yet they speak, not in words, but in patterns. And this was yours. You didn't just fall for emotionally unavailable men. You waited for them. You recognized them. You needed them to choose you, as if their love had the power to rewrite something sacred that was once torn. But where did that need begin? It began long before him. Before adult relationships, before first kisses and heartbreaks. It began in rooms filled with absence, even when they were crowded with people. The first abandonment rarely looks dramatic. Often, it looks ordinary. A mother too tired to attune, a father too burdened to see. A family dynamic where your needs were labeled as too much, your sensitivity dismissed, your pain met with silence. No one screamed. No one hit, and that's what made it so confusing, because it didn't look like trauma, but it felt like starvation. Emotional abandonment is not the absence of presence, it's the absence of being felt. And a child who is not felt learns to perform. You learn to be good, to be pleasing, to read the emotional weather of the room before you even understood what your own feelings were. You became attuned to others the way no one had been attuned to you. And in that hypervigilance, love became a role, not a right. So years later, when he came along, distant, distracted, inconsistent, your body didn't say danger. It said home, and not the kind of home that nourishes you. The kind of home where you tiptoe, where you give and wait for a glance, a gesture, a sign that you matter. The kind of home where love is earned, not given. That's why it was never about him. It was about the echo of a mother who only smiled when you made her proud, the echo of a father who praised you more for silence than for truth, the echo of being in pain and having no one notice, the echo of being too small to carry the loneliness but doing it anyway. He didn't awaken something new. He activated something ancient. He made you feel like the little girl again, reaching, hoping, trying. Because if you could just win his love, maybe that girl would finally be seen. This is the root of repetition compulsion. The psyche's need to return to the original wound, over and over, in the hope that this time, it will end differently. But the wound doesn't just ask to be seen. It asks to be understood. And understanding doesn't come from repeating the pattern. It comes from interrupting it. Here's the most painful truth you may need to hear. He wasn't abandoning you. He was just behaving the way people like him do. You were the one trying to turn it into something more. Because abandonment isn't just what others do to us. It's also what we do to ourselves. Every time we choose someone who makes us feel invisible, every time we silence our truth to be chosen, every time we betray our instincts just to not be alone. And that's what you did, isn't it? You abandoned yourself hoping he wouldn't. You quieted your needs hoping he would meet them. You made excuses for his coldness, convinced that if you just gave more, he'd warm up. But you weren't being loved. You were being reenacted by a wound that never got closure, by a nervous system still locked in a loop from childhood. Carl Jung said, "The greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of the parents." And maybe that was part of it too. Maybe your mother taught you to accept less. Maybe your father taught you to expect absence. Maybe the women in your lineage survived through silence and you inherited the weight of their unspoken pain. But your story can break that lineage. You don't have to keep calling abandonment chemistry. You don't have to chase people who are emotionally allergic to depth. You don't have to prove your worth by bleeding for it. You are not that little girl anymore, and this is no longer her home. So sit with that truth. Let it sting. Let it shake you. Let it collapse the fantasy, because once the fantasy dies, you can finally be born. And if you're feeling something inside right now, a grief you can't name, a quiet sorrow rising to the surface, that's the sound of the echo fading. Not because he finally chose you, but because you did. You thought it was him, the way he looked at you without really seeing you, the way he pulled you close and disappeared when your heart leaned in, the way his silence echoed louder than his presence. You thought he was the reason you felt so much, so hollow, so high, so addicted to the flicker of attention followed by the freeze of distance. But it was never about him. He was the mirror, not the source. And the mirror was always reflecting something older, something you weren't ready to see. Until now. He didn't reject you. He reflected where you had already rejected yourself. He didn't abandon you. He mirrored the way you'd been abandoning, your own boundaries in exchange for belonging. He didn't confuse you. He revealed how confused your inner child still was, between love and survival, because that's what a projection is. In Jungian psychology, a projection is what we cast outward when we refuse to face what lives within. It's how we meet our own unconscious, on someone else's face. You didn't fall for him. You fell into the illusion that he would complete the story you've been carrying inside, the story that says, if I'm good enough, they won't leave. He was just a man, flawed, possibly wounded, but not magical, not mystical, not capable of healing what he didn't break. The magic was yours, and you handed it to him. You placed your hope in his hands like a child offering a broken toy to a distracted parent, whispering, "Can you fix it?" And when he didn't, not because he was cruel, but because he was unequipped, the pain wasn't just heartbreak, it was remembrance. It was the resurfacing of every moment you were unseen, unchosen, unmet. All those early wounds returning, like ghosts to haunt a house you thought you had outgrown. But that house still lived inside you, and he just walked through the door. That's what makes this so painful. He didn't harm you by being malicious. He harmed you by being exactly who he was, a man too familiar to be safe, too distant to be healing, too symbolic to be ignored. He was never the destination. He was the messenger, the one who triggered the alarm system of your nervous system, not because he caused the danger, but because his energy matched the blueprint of those who once did. And that's where your power begins to return. The moment you stop seeing him as the one who broke you, and begin seeing him as the one who revealed where you were still broken. This isn't about blame. This is about recognition. You projected your longing onto him. You made him the container of your unloved parts. You turned his inconsistency into a riddle, one that, if solved, might finally make you feel chosen. But here's the truth that will set you free, even if it breaks your heart first. He was never the mirror. Your wound was. He just stood, still enough for you to see it. All your grief, all your yearning, all your strategies, overgiving, overthinking, overstaying, were never about the present moment. They were about trying to rewrite a chapter from your past without rereading it first. You see, mirrors don't speak. They don't soothe. They don't change. They only reflect. And when you mistake a mirror for a man, you will spend your love trying to earn a reflection that tells you, you are enough. But the reflection isn't his job. It's yours. Because the most radical act of healing is not being loved by someone else. It's learning to love the part of you that waited in the dark for someone who never came. He couldn't meet you there. Not because you weren't worthy, but because he wasn't ready. The mirror cracked not because he shattered it, but because your vision finally cleared. And in that clarity, you begin to see. It was never about making him stay. It was about learning why you kept leaving yourself in order to be chosen. This chapter was never meant to be romantic. It was meant to be revelatory. He wasn't the one. He was the reflection. The living symbol of everything you still believed about love, that it had to be chased, earned, suffered for. But now, the spell is breaking. The trance is dissolving. You no longer need to see your worth through his eyes, because the mirror was never a man. It was your past. And now, it's time to stop reliving it. You said it was love that broke you, that loving him shattered your trust, collapsed your spirit, made you question your worth. You told yourself it was love that deceived you, because you gave everything, and still, it wasn't enough. But love didn't betray you, memory did. Not the kind of memory you can access with thought, not stories or facts. This betrayal came from a deeper, older archive. The memory stored in the body, the memory of patterns, of emotional landscapes long forgotten by the mind but still pulsing through your nervous system like a hidden current, steering you toward the familiar. You didn't fall for him because he loved you well. You fell because he felt like home. But that home was built on unspoken ache, emotional absence, and the unrelenting need to prove you're worth staying for. So no, love didn't hurt you. Your nervous system did what it was wired to return to what it knows, not what it needs. This is the silent sabotage that few recognize. You met someone and your body responded, not with peace, but with a spark. That dizzy, breathless sensation, the flutter, the ache, the rush, and you called it chemistry. You thought it meant connection. You thought it meant truth. But the body isn't just responding to the present. It's echoing the past. That spark? It was the body recognizing a dynamic it had danced before. Emotional chasing, anxious waiting, conditional attention. You mistook it for romance, but it was resonance. The resonance of wounds calling to wounds. Your memory betrayed you by translating pain as passion, by interpreting unavailability as value, by confusing the emotional roller coaster for something sacred. That is what trauma does. It distorts your compass. It teaches you that love feels like tension, like working hard to be chosen, like waiting for the emotional crumbs and calling it a feast. It wires you to associate inconsistency with desire. And when someone mirrors that emotional instability, your body lights up. Not because you're in love, but because you're in familiarity. Carl Jung once wrote, "Neurosis is always a substitute for legitimate suffering, and so many of us carry this hidden neurosis. The compulsion to recreate emotional chaos so we never have to feel the original grief of being unloved. That grief is enormous. It's silent. It's been waiting inside you for years, maybe decades, and when someone comes along who offers a version of that same withholding, even if just energetically, your unconscious sees an opportunity. This time it whispers, if I just do everything right, maybe I won't be abandoned. But that whisper isn't love. It's your history, speaking through hope. And that's why this chapter matters. Because if you keep blaming love, you will eventually close your heart. You'll start to believe that deep connection always ends in pain. You'll start to numb the very parts of you that are wired for intimacy, the softness, the vulnerability, the trust. But love never lied to you. What lied was the memory that told you suffering was a requirement for being loved. What betrayed you was the voice that said if you just hold on tighter, stay longer, shrink smaller, someone will finally stay. That was never love. That was your coping mechanism, shaped by years of emotional starvation. And here's what's most tragic and most liberating. The version of you that fell for him wasn't the adult. It was the inner child. The little one who still believes that love is something you earn by sacrificing yourself. The one who learned that being chosen meant being quiet, good, accommodating. The one who doesn't know that real love doesn't require performance. And so, you played out the same story again. You gave too much. You stayed too long. You begged in silence, compromised in private, cried into pillows rather than set boundaries. Not because you're weak, but because your memory, your emotional memory, was louder than your reality. But now you see it. You see that you weren't crazy. You were conditioned. You weren't dramatic. You were desperate to be seen. You weren't unworthy. You were just still using old maps to navigate new terrain. And those maps led you back into the storm. But the storm was never love. Love doesn't require you to abandon yourself. Love doesn't confuse you into silence. Love doesn't punish you for needing closeness, presence, reassurance. Love is not adrenaline. Love is not withdrawal. Love is not walking on emotional glass and calling it devotion. Love is steady. Love is consistent. Love is boring to a nervous system addicted to chaos, but healing to a soul exhausted by survival. So what happens now? You grieve the memory. You grieve the old compass. You stop blaming love, and you start grieving the years you spent confusing pain for meaning, because that's what it was. Meaning. You needed the chaos to mean something. Otherwise, what was all the suffering for? It's a strange feeling. The quiet. Not peace, not yet. But the absence of the ache that once defined you. For so long, the pain had a voice. It chose his name. It echoed through your chest at 2 a.m., whispering, if only. It made you scroll, wait, cry, stay, beg, without words. It gave you a sense of purpose, even in suffering. Because when the wound screams, you feel alive, not whole, but activated. And in that activation, you feel close to love, even if the love was never real. But now, it's quiet, and the silence isn't empty. It's sacred. This is what healing sounds like. The absence of the need to chase. The stillness inside when you see his name and no longer flinch. The moment you realize you haven't thought about him in days. The realization that your worth no longer hangs from the thread of his attention. You didn't get closure from him. You didn't get apologies, explanations, grand gestures. You got clarity from yourself. And that is always more powerful. Because the wound was never asking for him. It was asking for you. It was begging to be seen. Not by another, but by the one who abandoned it the most. You. The woman who kept showing up for others while abandoning herself. The woman who gave until she bled, just to feel like she mattered. The woman who mistook chaos for chemistry, distance for depth, silence for mystery. But you're not her anymore. Because you've walked with your wound. You've listened to it scream. Not to silence it, but to understand it. And in that understanding, something ancient has dissolved. Not erased, but integrated. You no longer need him to see you. You no longer need him to stay. You no longer build temples out of his absence and call them altars of love. Because you are now what you were always waiting for. This is the quiet of reclamation. And yes, at first it feels hollow. Because the noise of the wound had become your rhythm. And silence feels like absence when you've lived your whole life waiting for the sound of someone else's footsteps. But keep breathing. Soon, this silence will start to feel like safety. Soon the calm will stop feeling like boredom. Soon the stillness will feel like home. Not the haunted kind, but the healing kind. the kind you build inside your own body. The kind where the little girl in you no longer waits at the window for someone who was never coming. You no longer perform to be loved. You no longer shrink to be chosen. You no longer abandon yourself in the name of connection, because now you know, the wound was never meant to be erased. It was meant to be held. And you? You became the one who could hold it. The child you were. The woman you are. The ache you carried. The love you now create. Not from desperation, but from depth. This is what happens when the wound stops screaming. You hear your own voice again, and it is strong, and it is clear, and it no longer begs to be rescued because it remembers it was never broken, just waiting to be reclaimed by the one who finally came home. You didn't lose love. You lost an illusion that was stitched together by memory, pain, and hope. And in its unraveling, you found you. If this journey cracked something open, if it named a silence you've carried for years, if it reminded you that your pain had a pattern and your longing had a language, then stay not for me. For you. For the part of you that's finally done mistaking emotional labor for love. For the version of you that's learning to rest in her own arms. For the voice inside you that no longer wants to scream, but to speak. Subscribe. Because we are not here to chase, we are here to remember, and this space one was made for the remembering.